So, right, hello everyone. Nice half an hour on cohort analysis. You would have seen that we are recording the session, it'll be available for others on the practitioners forum. So I try and keep this light because, as with most data analysis, it can be a little bit heavy. So I've got some slides to walk us through it, and after that I will show you an example through Excel, so a little walkthrough so you get a sense of what it would look like. So as I'm using slides and as it's Teams, I can only see one person, but if you do have any questions as we go along, just shout out. There'll be a bit of time, I'm sure, at the end if you do have any questions. So cohort analysis, we're just going to cover what it is and when and how to use it. So we'll talk through how we can actually produce a cohort analysis. So starting with what is cohort analysis. Initially, to understand what a cohort is, and by cohort we generally mean that it's some form of group, a segment, or a category, some form of grouping. And two key elements to that: it will be members of a group or a segment, if you will, that share a characteristic or have some sort of common thing. And importantly, that characteristic is being shared for a defined period of time. So it could be all of the people that came into a service on a particular day. It could be everyone that's of a particular height or something like that. It doesn't really matter what it is, but as long as they share a particular commonality, and that remains the case over a period of time. So the analysis itself is a longitudinal study. So the idea is here that we observe things over a period of time, and it might be that you are looking at a particular cohort, so one cohort over a period of time. Some of you may have seen that Channel 4 show when they take a cohort of children and follow them through their lives. A very long study indeed. I think they looked over 40 years, or are planning to look over 40 years of that particular cohort's time. Or you can start to look at differences between different cohorts as well over time. So what the differences between them, or even more so, you can start to compare a cohort with a wider audience. So how do they compare against the wider population, for example? So all of those are important. We also start to look at, on one graph, how different cohorts are doing over a period of time, which is where it starts to get really interesting. So just some examples from some of the worlds that you guys are in. So in housing, you might look at repairs raised and look at what their current job status might be vacant properties and voids process and their current status as well. More generically, look at things like customer queries or customer complaints and the status of that resolution being provided to the customer. In charities, you might look at supporter donations and their sort of progress towards completion. You might look at an event participant and their progress through a particular through that process, all the way from sort of registration through to their sponsorship being banked and thanked. And in finance, you might look at something like invoices and where they are within that payment process. A particular cohorts, it might be all the invoices received on a particular day, where they might be in terms of in progress. So just some simple examples to give you an idea of what we mean. So let's talk about how to conduct that cohort analysis. So the first thing you want to do is confirm exactly what it is you want to analyze. As with any sort of analysis, any sort of data analysis, really key to understand what it is you want to get out of this. And then we can start to think about what data is needed. So, what will your y-axis be? So what is it that I'm interested in? Is it the status that they're in, a particular stage that they might be going through? Tends to be where cohorts are quite relevant. Is it that you want to look at a particular cohort? Or are you looking at different cohorts? You can worry about the presentation afterwards, but am I interested in comparing one cohort to another, or is it just the progress of a particular cohort? Then over what time period? How long will this cohort analysis last for? At which points and milestones or defined time periods do I want to check up and see the status of that cohort? So is it something I go back to every week, every month? Is it something I want to run for 6 months? Is it something I need to run for longer than that? Is it something that we run continuously on a weekly basis? So a lot of the sort of leading measures that we talk through with clients, we do look to get people set up on measuring this continuously for those defined periods. Yeah, so what's that x-axis going to be is a really important question. So how do you know, is it weekly, is it monthly, is it yearly? It can be either of those. The key thing is for it to be a cohort analysis, it's always going to be some form of time period. If you don't have that, it's no longer a cohort analysis. Okay. So then we can go into selecting the cohorts. So if it's one cohort group, just making sure that they have that commonality. So it might be a cohort of patients, for example, in this, that are referred to therapy in January, whatever it might be. It's a relatively simple analysis. And as I said before, it's really there to analyze the changes within that group over time. You can use it as well to compare members of the cohort with each other. The data behind, you can start to look at those, but it's often not that. It's usually to see how the cohort is moving through a particular process or pathway. If you're looking at several cohorts, obviously they're going to have some form of separation, something that distinguishes one from another, but they have to have that similar characteristic. They have to have some commonality across them, otherwise they're not comparable. So in this example, 3 cohorts forms a residence, a group where their tendency starts in the 80s, another group in the 90s, and another group in the noughties. And here again, we're looking to analyse the changes within the groups over time, but it also enables us to look at the comparison between those different groups over a given time period. Okay, hopefully all making sense so far. Next stage, which is often actually the most difficult, is to get the raw data. Obviously, none of this works without that data in the first place. As it's a longitudinal study, you have a couple of options. So you can either find the information that's been recorded previously for that group of people over those given points of time, which is often accessible. So it's, you might have the status of, I don't know, repairs jobs, for example, at the end of every month. That's the sort of thing that gets recorded by a system and is generally, something that we can pull. The more, not necessarily the more difficult one, the one that's, we tend to look at and look sort of forward looking, is observing and recording information as it happens over those set periods. So you might, we often say, we want to take it at the end of this week, capture that and understand where we're at, so we're ready for the next week. Yeah, so it starts to become more of a leading indicator, drives activity for the following week. So some key points: it must indicate which cohort an individual is part of. So what, and I'll walk through an example raw data set, but it must be clear as to which cohort they belong to. Must be collected for the same period of time, whether that's a snapshot, a milestone, an end of a week, an end of a month, whatever it is, it's the same period of time. It's got to be the same thing that you're looking at, so you're observing the same thing. So here's an example of rent arrears status at the end of each month. So you want to be doing that for all of the different cohorts. And those points in time need to be the same for all. It's either beginning of a week, an end of a week, end of a month, whatever it is. You don't want to be doing a cohort, one cohort at the beginning of the month, another one mid-month, and another one at the end. Again, throws it all off. Doesn't mean anything. So making sure you get those stepping points or those points in time the same for every single cohort. And then we're going into presenting the findings. So one of the things you will have to use, and most of you will be using these already, is some form of pivot table where we can get each of the cohorts into a row, in essence. So every single individual that belongs to a particular cohort becomes a row. The times for when the data is collected will become your column headings in that pivot table. And again, I'll show you an example of what that looks like. And that might be the statuses that you're looking at. It might be the the status at a time, but it's whatever you've decided is going to be the important factor. So the sum in the middle, of course, is going to be the data fields that are going to make up your y-axis. Yeah. So it's usually the count of or the sum of that you're looking at there. And what you end up with, some examples of what you can end up with. This is probably the sort of simplest form, something I'm sure most of you will have seen at least once in your life. So this example is rent arrears for different cohorts. So cohort 1 is tenancy starting in the 80s, 90s, and then the noughties. And we can see what rent arrears does over the same time period. So I would ignore, so this is January 2016 through to December 16. So the comparison we're doing is, are people who have an earlier tenancy different to those that have a later tenancy, in this case 80s? You can see this particular cohort seems to have lower arrears across across this total time period, although it tends to reduce over the period of the year, whereas those with the later tenancies, the 90s and 2000s, tends to do a different thing, tends to have an upward trend over the course of the year. So we can start to make some conclusions around there being a difference depending on when a tenancy was created. Something we tend to use more often is this slightly more complicated cohort analysis, which actually does a couple of things. So it looks at where a particular cohort is at present, but it also looks at how, you know, I suppose to some degree, the journey that you've had in terms of jobs raised. So this is what we would suggest is an ideal and can be realistic example of this is I believe a repairs scenario. So what we have here, the bars basically represent, each of the bars represent a different cohort. Okay, so here we've got, what we've got, 3, 6, 9, got what, probably 18, 19, 20 different cohorts, and the cohort is decided by the week in which their job was raised. So this first cohort is a group of people, all of whom had a job raised somewhere between the 21st of June to the 27th of June. And what this bar shows is their current status, you know, as of the last time this graph was pulled, which looks like it was probably going to be the 18th of December 2021. Yeah, so it's a current snapshot of where that cohort is. Now, it's no surprise those that cohort which had jobs raised in June are mostly, and I say mostly because it's not totally, all of those jobs are now fully complete. Okay, there still remains a very small percentage where this particular organisation has not been able to gain access, and there's a very small percentage also that have ended up being cancelled. Okay, now what you see is as we get closer to those sort of the cohorts of the people that where jobs have been raised more recently, actually we can see, so if, you know, let's take this example here. So it's the 15th of November, 21st of November cohort. You can see the majority, again, you know, over 80% of the jobs have been completed, but there still remains, even 5 weeks later, a good percentage, probably around sort of 10, 12%, where an appointment's made, yet the job remains uncompleted. Yeah. So this is an ideal world. This is a pretty good situation where we've got everything that was raised the previous week. Near half of them have been completed. Half of them have appointments made. There are some that we haven't been able to access, and there have, you know, administratively, there's probably been a few that we've had to cancel. Okay, that's not too bad. But if we look at this chart, okay, not so great. This is showing that we've got jobs, you know, that are 10, 20, you know, 10, 15 weeks old that still haven't been completed. Then what's great about a cohort, because of the way it's constructed, if I was looking at this, I would be able to double click on any of these bars, particularly the yellow ones or the blue ones, and have a look at the list of jobs that sit there. I could look at the individuals that are there, and it really can help me focus my attention on that group or that cohort of people. Okay. The other thing I forgot to mention is this line that runs across. So this is looking at the right-hand side, what we call the secondary axis. All this is the number of jobs that were raised in that particular week. So in this instance, whereas most of the time when we're looking at the bars, this bottom line, this axis here, is a category. Yeah, it's basically saying this is this cohort. When we're looking at the line, that bottom axis becomes a time period. Yeah, so what we see here is that the jobs raised were relatively stable, though in beginning of November we had a massive increase, and unsurprisingly it comes back down as we go towards Christmas, although it looks like it's gone back up week before Christmas. Okay, so this is an example of an organization that isn't doing particularly well. Yeah, they're not getting through the jobs, they're not completing them, there's lots outstanding. Even what 20 weeks, if we're looking, there's still somewhere appointments are made, and there's a greater number that are being cancelled compared to the previous example, sort of 8%-ish. And then show you an example of what we might find if you look at a target-driven organization. Again, not brilliant. Yeah, what we're looking for is a nice steep curve of green, but we don't see that. What we see is, a low curve, lots of yellows where appointments are made, and then randomly a cutoff point, which we undecidedly, I'm sure, will be their 60-day or whatever target they've got, and they've got no more appointments made. Jobs are either completed or cancelled, and what you'll see here is the cancelled volume starts to increase quite dramatically after a particular period, certainly compared to the previous two graphs that I showed you. So a much greater level of cancellation, or what we might call blaming the customer for no access. We haven't been able to get in, so that's often something that you can see. And again, you can click into any of these at any point and start to understand that. Okay. So they were examples of cohort analysis. What I'll do now, any questions at this point on how they might be used? Okay, so I will share, I'll bring it up first. I will share an Excel sheet just to provide an example of how you would work through it. Bear with. So let me increase the size of this. So we'll start with raw data. It doesn't matter that you can't see the detail of this, but this might be an example, the sort of thing you'd see in terms of raw data. This again is a repairs example. Don't be surprised that we use this for repairs teams a lot in the housing sector. So the area, an order number would be here. The status is really important, of course, and this might be complete or whatever it might be. We've taken out the property ID and the address, which breaks down the individual, lots of information, trade, month. What's really important here, there are particular lines that we're really interested in. One is when it was created, because that assigns it to a particular cohort, and we're interested in its status at this moment in time. The rest of it, not so important. What we're interested in are really those two things. So once we've got that raw data, we can wipe out everything we don't need. So as I said, all we're really interested in here is at an individual level, is all the individuals, when they were created, and the order status. It doesn't really matter really at this stage even around identifiers, but of course we can use them. This is really just to show you which two columns are the most important. Once we've got those two columns, or those important columns that we would pull from the raw data, we would create a pivot table such as this, where we've got the rows, as I said, defining the cohorts that they are particularly in this case. So in this case, we've said the week in which the job was raised. So we've got a cohort of the 1st to the 10th, 14, and then it's a week. Each cohort represents a particular week. Along the top, we're not too interested in time. We're interested in the status in this case. So we have got here, by the raw data, the status of that particular job along the top. Once we have that pivot table, what we want to do is sort of clean it. And that normally means when we've got a situation like this, because repairs teams, voids teams, housing, charity and donation statuses, often what you find is you've got lots and lots of them. I mean, this is actually not bad. We've been to places where you've got 16 different statuses. Now that's not particularly helpful because it's hard to read. So what you want to do next is you want to clean that data, really get it to the status level. So what we've done here is said we really want to know if the jobs that have been raised, because that gives us our line, our number. We want to know jobs that have been cancelled, suspended for any reason, that they've been issued, i.e. they're out with an appointment at this point, or if it's not repairs, if it's IT service desk, that someone's looking at that at the moment, in progress, if you will, and then jobs completed. Yeah, so we've amalgamated what was previously this many statuses into the few that we're really interested in. Okay. Once you've done that, you can create your analysis. Okay. What you will want to be very careful of is making sure that you have these ordered correctly. So I always go with the complete status as close to the cohort label as possible, because that means it will appear at the bottom. Yeah, so it gives you that shape that we're after. It's much easier to look for patterns and shapes in graphs than go into the detail. And this particular data set would produce this graph. Okay, so we've got the completed at the bottom, the green. The next sort of best status, if you will, which is job issued, so it's out, it's in progress, as the next one. Job suspended, the ones that we're really interested in, the jobs cancelled, whether that's administrative or, I mean, this is a real data set, so this is a real example of an organisation and where they're at the moment. Yeah, and this is what you end up with. So if I was to look at this, I would say, well, it's not the steepest curve in the world. We're not getting to jobs particularly quickly. It's odd that we have this random job issued again status for this particular cohort. I'd want to know what that was about, why that's happened. The number of jobs raised seems sensible. There was a drop during Christmas and then a sharp increase towards the end of that January month once the holiday honeymoon is over. That's expected, so nothing too much there. But we've got a good big volume of for all of the cohorts. There's not a single there's one cohort here that goes under that sort of 10% here as well. That's quite a large number of jobs that are being cancelled. I'd be looking at those and trying to understand, is it duplicate jobs? Is it just administrative errors, or are we getting to a certain stage and starting to say, oh, these jobs are a bit, outstanding. We should probably knock these off our list. Yeah, the fact that it starts quite high, even sort of for these cohorts, which are only 5 or 6 weeks old, suggests that it might be an administrative error. But I would click on this, go into that job at an individual level, and start exploring. Okay. So yeah, raw data. Yeah, you can pull out, or if you were to pull out, it look like this. But if you don't, you just use a pivot table to pull out the key, grand totals that you're interested in. Then you order and amalgamate, statuses as you would like. And again, if it's not status along the top, it just might be dates along the top, time frames along the top. Where are they in month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, and so forth. And then use that table. And it's a split bar chart that you're after. And the secondary axis is the line chart. And there you have it. You have your cohort analysis, which you can use as required. Okay. Any questions at all around cohort analysis?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Probably a bit of a weird one. I noticed you'd blanked out the job numbers and the names. Is that for our benefit, or?
It was, yeah, because we didn't want to give away which.
Yeah, I'm always a bit confused. Obviously, do quite a lot of data analysis, and it's going to have people's names in it. How that sits with GDPR and ability to process that data.
Yeah, I mean, usually, obviously, within an organisation, it's perfectly fine. I mean, when we look at them, we tend to use a job reference because that's a good enough identifier, or a postcode, or an address might do the job. So it depends on what you're measuring. If you were looking at, for example, in a charity and looking at supporter donations or event progress, unless you've got a unique identifier, you'd probably use the person, because the purpose of it is to make sure that a process they want completed is being completed. You wouldn't use it for anything else. This isn't, I wouldn't use cohort analysis hugely. The first graph I showed you, the sort of line graph, it can help notice trends and things like that. Yes, and you might use that as a lagging form of sort of research type data. More commonly, we use the latter charts that I've shown you, which are more leading indicators. Where is this, this cohort, this case, where is it now? That's what we're really interested in. What do I do different today or tomorrow that will change the status of this cohort?
And if you've got that job identifier, when you're double clicking in a thing, you need that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've got to go back into the case and do what you need to. So.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So you're saying it's more of a how are we doing right now than how did we do?
Yeah.
So
that's our preference. I mean, you know, Ad Esse, I know, Mark, you've been on a few of these. We definitely prefer more leading indicators, things that tell you, measures that tell you I need to do something different now. So if I was working with a repairs team, a set of, group of schedulers or, operatives or, supervisors, anything like that kind of level, then I would be looking at the here and now. Where are we right now? I'd be using the sort of the later graphs I showed you. If I was reporting up to a management team or something like that, where I wanted to explain a trend, and it seems as if the rent arrears example, it seems those that have earlier tenancies are better with managing their arrears over the course of a year with arrangements, for example, than people with the newer tenancies. What does that mean? We should perhaps do something differently. What did we do with them that we don't do anymore? Our sign-ups are maybe, we reduce the amount of time we spend on them. So do we increase them? So if we're looking at directional type information, sort of, as I call it, sort of research, then yes, you would use it as a lagging measure. But that kind of thing doesn't tend to help frontline teams because it's done and dusted. Can't change it anymore. So the current status helps more.
Yeah. And the time period, you had weekly on there as an example. I kind of feel the shorter, almost the shorter the better. To see as soon as something's happened, do something about it.
100%. I mean, it depends again on the sort of turnaround time, the cycle time of a process. If you work in a sort of administrative team or sort of service center type team where you're getting daily customer inquiries, I'd look at it daily, because you'd expect things to be get to about 5 or 6 days at the latest, and then that's it. Once a cohort is complete, i.e. all of them are complete, and you have sort of maybe cancelled along the top, you no longer need it. You should that cohort can come off. But you saw in the repairs, example that I showed you, all the jobs raised examples, some of them go on for 20 weeks. Now, if you're doing 20 weeks daily, it'd be too much to take on. So, I think you have to respect the cycle time of a process and take that into account. Good. Any other questions at all? No? Okay, well, I'll post I'm conscious of time. We'll post a recording. Anyone that does have a question, by all means, just enter it into the practitioners group. I'm sure Rhiannon or I or one of the consultants will be able to answer that for you, or other people from the network. I know we've got lots of BAs and CIs who do this for a living. So by all means, feel free to answer any questions. Good stuff.